Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's always wonderful to see you in the chair. Last week, the Minister of Finance tabled Bill C-26, an act to amend the Canada Pension Plan, the Canada Pension Plan Act, and the Income Tax Act. I had the opportunity to sit and listen to the Minister during his speech and the question and answer portion, and listen to him try to explain to us in the House, as well to the viewers, how this bill is good for Canadians. I had the chance to ask the first question to the Minister during that period, and although he is a great speaker, I did not get the answer I was requesting. So to start, I'm going to pose this question once again, but in a different way, and hope that through the following hours of debate, that there is finally an answer. I shared with the Minister two quotes from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business and CEO Dan Kelly. The following quote: "It is tremendously disappointing to see that finance ministers are putting Canadian wages, hours, and jobs in jeopardy, and will willfully moving toward an already shaky economy even worse. Despite all the talk, it appears that jobs and the economy are not particularly high priorities for this government that has signed off on these deals." In another quote from Dan Kelly, he stated, "2/3 of small firms say they will have to freeze or cut salaries, and only 1/3 say they will have to reduce hours or jobs in their business in response to a CPP or QPP hike." These two statements are very troubling, especially with the statistics from 2013 indicating that there are 1,116,423 small businesses in Canada. That makes up 98% of all employer businesses in Canada. This same information shows that 86% of Canadian exporters are small businesses were small businesses in 2009. That accounted for $68 billion in exports, or approximately 25% of Canada's total export value. Locally, I've received data from my own riding of Elgin Middlesex London, done by CFIB, and when polled on the support for CPP increases, 12% of all Canadians in Elgin Middlesex London support this increase. That is 12%. That means 88% of the people polled did not agree with the CPP tax increases. So with these important figures, I will continue to discuss the concerns with increase to CPP and the impact on small businesses. But rather than continuing with all the stats and figures, I want to share with you my own personal experience as a small business owner. Many of us come to the House with different skill sets and different assets, which is very, very important. One of the assets that I have was being a small business owner. I had the opportunity to run a small business with 7 employees that was run by my former husband and I. When we took this business over in 1998, we purchased it as a franchise, and the gentleman was moving out of the franchise business. At that time, we had received the books showing how well the business was doing, so we were very excited about this first day on the job. But our first day accomplished $81 in sales. So my former spouse and I had paid 2 staff throughout the entire day because the hours of business were open from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. We paid 2 staffers throughout the day, looking at their shifts. And at the end of the day, our cash received for the items that we sold was $81. Now, obviously the issue here is we need to look at how to run a proper business. How can we do this? We had many, many obstacles in front of us, but one of the first things that we needed to do was reduce our costs. And by doing so, we had to look at what were some of the costs that a business could reduce without impacting what you're selling. I was in a small coffee shop. We were a coffee house where there was entertainment 5 nights a week. We served in an area where there was TD Bank and many other local businesses. So we are a very common stopping ground for people on their way to work and off their way to work. So one of the first things that we did was business promotions. And that began to bring in some sales. But at the same time, we had extraordinary expenses. I was in a location where our actual cost per rent was $3,800 per month in the downtown core of of London. So I was dealing not only with an extravagant expense when it came to the rent, but we also had high hydro costs. And for anyone who lives in Ontario, believe it or not, it's actually even worse than it was in 1998. And we were spending at least $400 and $500 per month on those costs. We also had other costs that we had to look at, whether it's municipal taxes or different things that we had to go and propose to council so that we could put seating outside. There was many, many things that we had to deal with red tape. But the number one thing that I did was to reduce costs, and it was really a horrible choice, was to reduce the number of staff. In order to make that business work, I needed to make sure that we had inventory. I needed to make sure that there were coffee beans and that there was milk and that there was lights on and that we paid the rent. That's what was important to me, because without those things, I could not run a business. So the first thing that I could make and as expense that we had to change was by decreasing it by 2 employees. It was a very, very difficult decision for us to make, because these were 2 lives of students who were going to Western University, and we had taken away 15 hours per person just to make the ends meet. Now, over time, it happened that we did do better. But at the same time, as a small business owner, and anyone who is a small business owner will recognize that you're not just there counting the receipts at the end of the day. You're paying the bills. In my case, I recognize that a pound of bacon I could buy pre-cooked for $7.50, or I could pre-cook that bacon myself in my own kitchen for $3.50. So every single thing mattered, especially when the first day of business was bringing in $81. But the first thing I had to do was reduce my staff. I myself then, for 7 days a week for a year and a half, would go in and work. Now, take into consideration, at that time I had a child who was 3 months old, a child that was 19 months old, and a child who had just reached the age of 4 and just started JK. So this is about a family-run business. So this is not just about those rich small business owners. This was about a family that was running a business, a mom, a dad, and 3 children. So what I did was I would go in there and I would scrub the toilets. I would do all of those things so that we had the business. By the end of this, we did end up doing very, very well, and after about 18 months, it was either mental wellness and selling the business, or continuing to work every day, and we decided to sell that business. But I can tell you that one of the biggest things we had to do to keep our costs low was reducing the wages. And with wages, we have to look at what payroll means. It's not just the CPP contributions that this government is talking about, the premiums. Those premiums are matched by employers. They're matched not only by the employers, but they're matched by the employee themselves. We have employment insurance premiums. There's WSIB, and I'm sure there's very similar programs across the country. So as a small business owner, you're not just dealing with paying the taxes that are removed from somebody's pay, but you're also doing matching contributions. There's many, many things from this, and I think that's the one thing that we need to sit back and get in the shoes of a small business owner. So making business decisions can be very, very difficult. And I fear with this change of the CPP, what you're asking small businesses to make that same decision that I had to make to have successful business. In order to reduce the cost, you have to reduce your expenses. And an easy way of reducing expenses is the hardest job, and that's by cutting staff. It is about cutting human resources, and I think we need to talk about this. On Friday, I asked the member from Foothills about his challenges in his region, where over 200,000 jobs have been lost in Alberta. In my region, I saw a similar thing happen, where between 2008 and 2010, we went through also the global economic downturn. I asked him particularly, will the CPP tax hike hurt new businesses? Obviously, the answer is one thing, and that is yes. Changing on to another direction, we have to also make sure that Canadians are aware of what this program is. Yeah. When CFIB went out with the ISPOS poll, they noted that 40% of Canadians think that the government contributes to CPP. And we have to make sure that people realize it's not that. It is the employers that contribute. It is not about the government here. And we cannot confuse Canadians when we're talking about CPP and we're throwing in how the GIS has been increased. All we're doing is taking the 3 pillars of retirement, and we're confusing the average Canadian who has not had the opportunity to sit down and study it. Retirement is about 3 pillars. It's about the CPP contributions and that of the employee and the employer. It's about the social programs such as old age security and guaranteed income supplement, and it is about personal savings. And in this government, we have seen that they've reduced on the personal savings also through the tax-free savings account. But the bottom line is more money cannot be taken out of Canadians' pockets. And I want to finish up with one quote. And this is a quote that I'm sure many times the government has heard. Whatever the reason might be to expand the CPP is not to eliminate poverty. The poverty rate among seniors is now as close to 0 as we can get. Yes, a little over 5% of seniors today will still have income below the poverty line. And that is from Fred Vitas, Chief Actuary Morneau Chappelle, and co-author of Bill Morneau's book, of the Finance Minister's book, The Real Retirement, published, and this segment taken out of Financial Post, June 5th, 2016. So I would really ask that we look at these things and recognize that CPP is not about poverty reduction. These CPP increases will hurt, especially when we have things like the precarious carbon tax that we're going to see and the small business tax reduction that was not honored by this government. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for her speech, and there's no doubt about it. I think she has a valid point when she talks about CPP contributions and making sure that employers are able to afford this. I mean, as a small business owner myself, I'm fully aware of the fact that the employer has to match the CPP contributions. But, you know, it really comes down to balance, Mr. Speaker. It's about where is a healthy balance, and I can appreciate that that my honourable colleague might feel differently in terms of this particular piece of legislation that's being put forward. But I would ask her, what does she propose that we do 20 or 30 years from now when there are people who have not properly prepared for retirement? The burden will ultimately fall on the taxpayer one way or the other. We can either try to assist now to help people plan for the long term, or we can deal with the consequences of not doing that in the future. So, you know, perhaps it's a fundamental difference of political philosophy here at work, but I'm curious if the member could comment on that.
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
I thank the member very much for that great question. And truly, we're talking about saving for the future in 40 years. If people don't have jobs, they can't save money in the first place. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking a big slash out of small business opportunities. And so you can't save something if you don't have something. And I think that's what we have to remind ourselves. If we want to see great job creators in Canada, then give them the opportunity to succeed. Make sure that things like the 9% small business tax is implemented instead of saying we're going to do it in the future. Make sure things like carbon pricing, or carbon tax, whatever we're going to call it, make sure things like that are taking into, I was trying to be kind to this member. He asked a good question. I was trying to be nice to him. But we have to make sure that every time we look at that, that is part of this balance that we talk about. But if we're saving for the future, the number one thing that you have to save is the money from employment. And if you don't have jobs, you don't have money to save.
Yeah.
Questions et commentaires. Honourable député de Beloeil-Chambly.
Bien, merci, Monsieur le Président. Puis je suis un peu confus sur la position du Parti conservateur parce qu'en fait, la députée vient de dire que c'est une taxe sur les petites entreprises, mais en même temps, elle dit que ce n'est pas un revenu pour le gouvernement. J'ai entendu le député de Portneuf-Larcartier dire qu'il ne fait pas confiance au gouvernement, mais sa collègue qui dit que ce n'est pas un revenu pour le gouvernement. Bon, le député de Portneuf-Larcartier devrait peut-être se rendre compte qu'au Québec, c'est la RRQ et non la RPC, mais ça, c'est une autre question. Mais la question que je posais à ma collègue, au-delà de cette confusion autour de la position des conservateurs de dire que ce n'est pas le gouvernement, mais c'est une taxe en même temps, ce qui ne fait pas de sens, c'est aussi de comprendre. Bon, je n'ai jamais été propriétaire d'une entreprise comme elle, mais en même temps, je l'ai servi du café. Il y avait des personnes retraitées. Ils sont venus dans le commerce, dans l'établissement, dépenser de l'argent. À quelque part, les entreprises aussi doivent avoir des clients pour fonctionner. Alors, comment réconcilier la position de dire c'est pas bon pour les petites entreprises, mais en même temps, on veut laisser les aînés pas avoir une retraite sécuritaire et ne pas avoir de revenus à dépenser dans ces mêmes entreprises?
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
I thank the member for the question. And I think the thing is, any time it's an expense to a business, it is seen as a tax. So when you're looking at the Canada Pension Plan contributions, employment insurance contributions, WSIB contributions, and the business tax that you would see as a small business owner, those are taxes. Those are things that are not on the bottom line. Those are things that when you're looking at your ledger page, that is removed. It's not in that, it's in the red column instead of the black column. So I think we need to look at that. I'm not confused by any means. On this thing, I'm pretty darn definite that I shouldn't say I'm pretty darn definite, that's horrible, but I'm definite that this is not a good thing for Canadians. I see that we can sit there and try to sell it as a future option, but we can't be selling future options when people don't have options today. Thank you.
Yeah.